For 49 years, Richard Gerald Jordan has occupied the same cell on Mississippi's death row. At 78 years old, he holds a grim record: the longest-serving condemned inmate in the state's history. What crime could warrant nearly 5 decades of appeals, legal challenges, and stays of execution? What case has proven so complex that it has outlasted governors, judges, and entire legal careers? The story begins in 1976 with a man in work clothes, carrying a clipboard and wearing the confident demeanor of someone who belonged, approached a banker's wife at her front door. He claimed to be from the electric company. She let him inside. What happened next would trigger one of the most protracted legal sagas in American criminal justice history. On the 25th of June, 2025, at 6 o'clock in the evening, the state of Mississippi finally brought this unprecedented case to its conclusion. The question that haunts this story is not guilt or innocence. Jordan's culpability has never been disputed. The question is whether justice delayed for half a century can still be called justice at all. Born in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, Richard Gerald Jordan entered the world to parents Homer H. Jordan and his wife in 1947. The family relocated to nearby Petal, Mississippi, where Jordan would spend his formative years. Petal, population, barely 5,000. A town where everyone knew everyone else's business. Neighbors would later tell investigators that young Jordan maintained a spotless reputation throughout his school years. Clean-cut, well-mannered. The kind of boy who said "yes, ma'am" and "no, sir" without prompting. Teachers remembered him as unremarkable but respectful, blending seamlessly into the fabric of small-town Mississippi life during the 1950s and early 1960s. The Jordan household reflected traditional Southern values of the era. Church attendance every Sunday at the local Methodist congregation. Dinner conversations centered around community events and family obligations. Homer Jordan worked steady employment, providing the economic stability that characterized working-class families in post-war Mississippi. The family structure appeared solid from every external perspective. High school graduation arrived in 1965, presenting Jordan with the limited options available to young men from rural Mississippi. Military service provided the most promising path towards stable employment and technical training. Jordan made the decision that would fundamentally alter his psychological trajectory. He enlisted in the United States Army. Vietnam War service commenced in 1966, with Jordan completing initial training before deployment to Southeast Asia. Military records indicate he served 4 to 5 years in active duty, including 3 separate combat tours in Vietnam. The jungle warfare, the psychological trauma, the constant threat of enemy engagement. Jordan experienced combat conditions that would leave lasting psychological wounds on an entire generation of American servicemen. Anti-death penalty advocate Abraham Bonowitz would later describe Jordan's military service as profoundly traumatic, noting the absence of psychological support systems upon his return to civilian life. The military discharged Jordan without addressing the psychological consequences of extended combat exposure. No counseling, no transition assistance. No recognition of what would later be understood as post-traumatic stress disorder. Jordan returned to Mississippi in the early 1970s, attempting to rebuild civilian life with psychological baggage that remained undiagnosed and untreated. Marriage followed quickly, along with the birth of 3 children, who would grow up with a father struggling against invisible demons. The domestic stability that Jordan sought proved elusive as economic pressures combined with untreated psychological trauma to create an increasingly volatile foundation for family life. By 1975, Jordan's marriage showed signs of severe strain. Financial difficulties compounded the psychological challenges that he could neither articulate nor address through available resources. The combination of economic desperation and untreated combat trauma created a dangerous psychological cocktail that would eventually explode into criminal violence. January 1976. Mississippi winter. Cold mornings and financial pressures that mounted with each passing day. Richard Gerald Jordan, 30 years old, Vietnam veteran, father of 3, stared at unpaid bills while contemplating actions that would shatter multiple families forever. The target selection revealed calculated intelligence rather than random criminal impulse. Charles Wesley Marter, vice president of Gulf National Bank in Gulfport, married, father. Member of Mississippi's established banking elite. Everything Jordan was not. Jordan conducted surveillance of the Marter residence, noting daily routines and identifying vulnerabilities that could be exploited for criminal purposes. The house, the neighborhood, the family patterns. He observed Charles Marter departing for banking duties each morning, leaving his wife Edwina alone with their young son during predictable hours. The plan crystallized around a simple deception: that exploited the natural trust characterizing suburban Mississippi communities during the 1970s. Utility workers routinely gained access to residential properties without extensive verification procedures. Electric company employees checked circuit breakers, read meters, performed maintenance tasks that required homeowner cooperation. Jordan would pose as an electric company worker needing access to check electrical systems within the Marter home. The deception required props that Jordan acquired through careful preparation. Work clothes resembling utility company uniforms, tools that supported his electrical worker story. Confidence sufficient to convince an unsuspecting homeowner that his presence represented legitimate business rather than criminal intent. Psychological preparation proved more challenging than logistical planning. Jordan's upbringing emphasized respect for others' property and personal safety. Methodist church teachings reinforced moral boundaries against theft and violence. Military service had instilled discipline and respect for civilian populations. Fatherhood created emotional connections to family welfare and child protection. Yet something within Jordan's damaged psyche had shifted, allowing him to rationalize criminal actions that violated every moral principle that had previously governed his behavior. Combat trauma, financial desperation, the perceived injustice of his economic circumstances compared to the comfortable lifestyle enjoyed by families like the Marters. These factors combined to overcome moral restraints that should have prevented what was about to unfold. January 13, 1976. Tuesday morning, Jordan prepared for actions that would define the remainder of his natural life, while destroying the lives of innocent victims who had never caused him harm. Edwina Marter embodied the comfortable existence of Mississippi's banking community during the mid-1970s. 34 years old, wife to Charles Wesley Marter, mother to a 3-year-old son who represented the future of their established family line. Born into the DeGrue family of Louisiana, Edwina brought both social connections and cultural refinement to her marriage with the Gulfport banker. The Marter household reflected the economic security that characterized successful professional families in 1970s Mississippi. Comfortable home in a safe neighborhood, regular church attendance, social obligations that reinforced their position within Gulfport's established community. Edwina managed domestic responsibilities while supporting her husband's demanding career in banking operations. Family connections extended throughout Louisiana and Mississippi, with her sister Norma DeGruels residing in nearby Metairie. These relationships provided emotional support and cultural continuity that sustained Edwina through the challenges of raising a young child while maintaining the social obligations expected of a banker's wife. Edwina's daily routine reflected the predictable rhythm of middle-class domestic life during the decade following the civil rights movement. Morning responsibilities included household management and childcare, while Charles prepared for another day of banking operations in downtown Gulfport. Afternoon activities often involved community volunteer work and social obligations that maintained the family's position within established social circles. The 3-year-old boy, who would soon be orphaned, required constant maternal attention that characterized early childhood development. Feeding schedules, nap times, the countless small responsibilities that define motherhood during a child's most vulnerable years. Edwina approached these obligations with the dedication that reflected her upbringing and her commitment to providing her son with the same stable foundation that had characterized her own childhood. The 13th of January, 1976, began as an unremarkable Tuesday for the Marter family. Charles departed for banking duties. Edwina began her familiar routine of household management and childcare. The 3-year-old played with toys that reflected the family's comfortable economic circumstances. Nothing suggested that this ordinary morning would culminate in events that would destroy their family's future and create Mississippi's longest-running capital case. The trust that Edwina extended to strangers reflected the social contract governing suburban Mississippi communities during the 1970s. Neighbors helped neighbors. Service workers performed legitimate business with professional integrity. Families could rely on basic safety within residential environments where violent crime remained relatively uncommon. This trust would prove fatal when Richard Gerald Jordan appeared at her door. The doorbell rang at the Marter residence on the 13th of January, 1976. Edwina answered. Jordan stood on her doorstep, wearing work clothes and carrying tools that supported his electrical worker deception. He needed to check circuit breakers inside the house. Routine maintenance, nothing unusual. Edwina's cooperation with what appeared to be legitimate utility work reflected the natural trust that characterized interactions between homeowners and service workers in 1970s Mississippi. She opened her door, allowed Jordan access to her home, provided the cooperation necessary for him to complete what she believed represented normal electrical maintenance procedures. The moment when Jordan revealed his true intentions marked the beginning of a criminal sequence that would reverberate through Mississippi's legal system for nearly 5 decades. Terror replaced cooperation, as Edwina realized that the utility worker represented mortal danger to herself and her sleeping child. The transformation from routine household interruption to life-threatening criminal assault occurred within seconds. Jordan forced Edwina to leave her 3-year-old son sleeping alone in the house, creating a secondary victim whose childhood would be forever marked by his mother's disappearance. The boy would awaken to find his mother gone. No explanation, no goodbye, no understanding of the violence that had suddenly entered his young life. The drive to DeSoto National Forest in Harrison County provided Jordan with the remote location necessary for the final phases of his criminal plan. Edwina's desperation during this journey can only be imagined. Her attempts to negotiate for her life and her child's welfare. Her prayers for intervention that would never arrive. Her growing realization that Jordan intended murder rather than simple kidnapping. The forest setting revealed Jordan's familiarity with local geography and his calculated selection of locations where criminal activity could proceed without interruption. DeSoto National Forest offered the isolation that Jordan required for actions that would eliminate the witness who could identify him to law enforcement authorities. Jordan contacted Charles Marter with ransom demands, falsely claiming that Edwina remained safe while demanding $25,000 for her return. The husband's anguish as he arranged payment for his wife's supposed safety. The desperate hope that cooperation with criminal demands would result in Edwina's safe return to their family. The growing fear as hours passed without additional contact from the kidnapper. The collection of ransom money occurred before Edwina's murder, demonstrating Jordan's calculated approach to maximizing financial benefit while planning witness elimination from the beginning of his criminal enterprise. $25,000. Significant money in 1976. Enough to address Jordan's immediate financial pressures while providing resources for extended concealment of his criminal activities. The fatal shooting occurred in the back of Edwina's head, a method of execution that reflected both cowardice and cold calculation. Jordan chose a killing method that minimized his victim's suffering while ensuring immediate death that would prevent any possibility of survival and subsequent identification. The single bullet ended Edwina's life, while creating the physical evidence that would eventually convict her killer. The discovery of Edwina's body on a logging trail in northern Harrison County marked the beginning of what would become Mississippi's longest-running capital case. Local law enforcement arrived at a crime scene that provided limited physical evidence while dealing with a victim whose family connections demanded immediate and comprehensive investigative response. Mississippi authorities faced the challenge of constructing a murder case without witnesses to the actual killing, while dealing with evidence that had been compromised by forest exposure and weather conditions. The investigation required traditional police work combined with emerging forensic techniques that were becoming available to rural law enforcement agencies during the mid-1970s. Jordan's initial conviction and death sentence occurred in 1977, establishing his guilt for the kidnapping and murder of Edwina Marter. The evidence presented during trial demonstrated Jordan's culpability beyond reasonable doubt, though his case would eventually require 4 separate trials over 24 years, as various legal issues emerged through the appellate process. The consistency of guilty verdicts across multiple juries demonstrated both the strength of evidence against Jordan and the heinous nature of his crimes. Jordan's case became Mississippi's longest-running capital punishment litigation, consuming enormous legal resources while providing Jordan with a lifespan that exceeded his victim's abbreviated existence by nearly 5 decades. The U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear Jordan's final challenge in 2015, effectively exhausting his appellate options. Attorney General Lynn Fitch filed motions requesting an execution date for Mississippi's longest-serving death row inmate. The Mississippi Supreme Court scheduled Jordan's execution for the 25th of June, 2025, after determining that all legal appeals had been exhausted through state and federal court systems. Richard Gerald Jordan, now 78 years old, was executed after 49 years on Mississippi's death row. The execution represents the conclusion of Mississippi's longest capital case, though Jordan's advanced age raises practical questions about executing an elderly inmate decades after his original conviction. The case serves as documentation of the intersection between criminal justice, appellate procedure, and the passage of time within America's capital punishment system.